friends, this is Jason. Let's say you get in a little bit of an accident. This happens to be a Burrell RY30. Customer ran into the back of another cart after that cart had spun out in front of him, not leaving him much room. So I thought this would be a good time to do a quick little video on what to look for after a front end collision. So this one actually has some pretty good damage, so it's going to make a nice video. So first thing I always look at, just because I need certain systems, so I have I know what to look for, etc., and I just kind of go down my checklist. First thing I always look for is the steering shaft. So as you can see, this one here is quite bent. In fact, let's see here. You can see how bent that steering shaft is. So it's nice and bent. So this will need a steering shaft. The right tie rod is straight. The heims are straight. To me, when it comes to the steering, if it's questionable, replace it. If one of these happens to break, even though it looks okay, if that happens to break, you're going to lose your steering. And yeah, you don't want to lose steering. But the actual tie rod on the right side is straight. The heim joints, the threads going into the tie rods are straight. The left side, not so much. There's a little bit of a bend here. But the biggest issue, you can see the heim joint right there. The heim joint is bent. So for sure, that's getting replaced. Looking at the damage here, I am probably replacing the tie rod. And a lot of times, this situation is actually a little bit different. You see how the steering shaft is bent towards the gas tank? That's because the impact on the front end was so hard. All the energy just went through the steering shaft and collapsed. But more often than not, what happens is when you hit front end, the steering shaft and the steering wheel get ripped out of your hand. It comes around, and usually the steering shaft hits the tie rod, bending the steering shaft outwards or towards the front of the cart. That's usually more common. But like I said, this was a pretty big impact. So we're going to put on the parts list, new heim joints, new left tie rod. And before you pull anything apart, measure everything. This one's going to be a little bit hard because it's all bent. But many of the chassis nowadays have different length tie rods. So they'll have, like 270 on one side and 275 on another. And these are marked. Let's see. This one's a Burrell, so it's a free line. So this one happens to be a 255 on that side. So always check for measurements and marks. And then, if you bought a used cart, double check the measurements to make sure it's correct. So you see here we have a number of threads hanging out equally on both sides. That's a good sign, okay? Same on the right side tie rod. Now to me, this is a little borderline too short of a tie rod because there's a lot of thread hanging out. What you don't want is having, so you have the thread, the tie rod running into the heim joint running into the tie rod. Okay? What you don't want is one or two threads just barely hanging on. This is aluminum. It's just going to strip out. That's going to fall out. Then you have no steering. And then back into the wall. And then back to Extra Kart Parts for service. So always double check. So if someone uses a tie rod that's too long, you're not going to have any adjustment. The threads will be all the way bottomed out to the jam nuts. And speaking of jam nuts, so on many of the manufacturers, what they've started doing is, I don't know if you can see that notch. There's notches on this end of the tie rod. That is the end that indicates this is the left-hand thread. Okay? So you have a left-hand thread and a right-hand thread. So left-hand thread, right-hand thread. If you ever have to cut a tie rod or a shift shaft rod, don't ever cut the left-hand side unless you're one of those weird oddballs that happens to have a left-hand tap in your toolbox, but most of us do not. So do not cut the left side, the left thread tie rod end, if you have to shorten it. But you only have to shorten them if you don't have the right length available, and that's usually like a trackside fix where your buddy goes, oh, I have a 275 tie rod, and then you go, yeah, but I need a 255. So don't cut the left threaded side of a tie rod or a shift rod. So back to what we're looking for. Sorry, I try to throw a lot of information at you, so it's as it comes to my mind, I'm just throwing it out. And sometimes my videos are long-winded, but you can always just search through and go, oh, okay, I just need to know about this. Boom. Then just fast forward or rewind to that part. So back to the steering shaft, we're replacing the steering shaft. We're replacing the left side tie rod and the heim joints. Once I have everything apart, I will double check these as well. Depending on how bad the damage is elsewhere, I may just opt to replace those. Blue tape. So our buddy Walter, many of you know Walter. We all love Walter. He was helping me prep this cart, and he put blue tapes on the area that needed addressing. If you're at the track and you bend a spindle or a spindle arm, you can always bend it back and get it close. It will affect the geometry a little bit, but if you're at the track and it's an emergency to get you back out there for the main event, then bend it back. But since we're doing shop work, we're looking at this. This one's been bent a few times, so I'm going to put that on the parts order. I'm going to put a right side spindle on the parts order. Left side. If I'm doing the right after it was bent, I'm definitely doing the left, because you can see this thing's bent pretty good. And I know YouTube attracts a lot of do-it-yourselfers. I'm a do-it-yourselfer. Yes, I have a shop, but I'm also a do-it-yourselfer for a lot of things. Many guys will say, oh, just bend it back. Yes, I have done that in the past. Yes, you can do that. But again, when you're dealing with steering, this one happens to be bent right through the holes. I'm going to give the customer the option. It's like, hey, I would replace it. One, let's not lie. I am in the service business, so that's part of it. But two, let's not screw around with steering. Again, if this has a failure or it weakens and it breaks, you have no steering. So the other thing that we're going to look at, generally on the newer carts, the spindle arms will bend, tie rods will bend or snap. The steering shafts bend fairly easy. And yes, there's guys out there that will bend that steering shaft straight. I used to save them and send them out, but then when they came back, they weren't perfectly true, and it kind of drove me nuts because they had a wobble to them. It's like, nope, I just buy new. Again, unless it's an emergency. The other thing you're going to look for, spindle arms are bent. Again, on the newer chassis, those are the weak spots. They are designed to bend. Because if this stuff doesn't bend, then you're starting to bend or ripping off yokes off the chassis, and that becomes even more expensive. So as I pull this apart, what I'll do is I'm going to put lasers. I know it's all bent to hell, but I will put lasers on the spindles. I will gently loosen the kingpin bolt. That's the kingpin bolt. I will gently loosen it so I have to spin it with the wrench. You don't want a lot of slop in it, and I'll explain why. So loosen it enough so you can spin it with the wrench, but not slopping around. With your laser on the spindle, I don't care where you shoot it. It could be the tire, it could be to the wall, it could be to the other sniper, I don't care. You're going to spin the kingpin bolt. And if you have run out on your laser where it's going up and down, if you have any run out on the laser as you're spinning your kingpin bolt is bent. So you're going to replace that as well. So this is a big impact right here. I'll put $40 on there that says this kingpin bolt is bent. I will report back if I'm wrong. But so you spin just a kingpin bolt. And the reason you don't want to completely loosen this up is there's pills that have basically inserts inside of them to make it easier to do right heights. When you loosen it up too much, there's a lot of slop. So you want to make sure you're not accounting for the slop, and that's what's actually causing the run out in your laser, but it's actually a bent kingpin bolt. And again, most of the carts nowadays, it's very common from bent kingpin bolts. I've seen some chassis where you put too much caster into them, and just from a day of driving and going over curbs, bends them. So, yeah, kingpin bolts. On to the next item. The impact was so hard. I'm not laughing, but I am. Um, the heel rest was all moved. So when I see something like this, where I see the steering shaft is bent towards the gas tank, the heel stops are cockeyed. Number one, make sure your driver is okay. If you're the driver, just kind of give yourself a self-inspection and check for things that are going to hurt. Because after a crash like that, stuff is going to hurt. Now, unfortunately for this customer, this C hanger, or the yoke, it is approximately 25 to 30 millimeters higher than the right side. So the next thing I'm going to have to do is remove the engine and measure the chassis from the center of the kingpin to the axle on both sides, making sure the axle's straight. So you want to make sure that the axle's not bent, or you can't really do this. So axle straight. And what you're going to do is you're going to make sure those measurements are equal. If they're not, that means this is bent up and it's pushed back. Sometimes if it's too bad, real bad, you can feel it in the waist right here where the tube starts to kink. Now, there are a couple really good chassis guys out there. Tiago Prenzo Chassis Jigs. He travels all over the country. He has the right setups and fixtures where he can clamp the chassis down in multiple points and straighten that stuff out. But generally, when you start kinking the tubing, it's going to be compromised, and it may still actually be usable or safe. But if it's kinked, there's a good chance it's just going to bend or flex much easier in the future. So depending on your level of racing, if you're racing at the national level, you're probably going to retube it, reframe it, or move on. But if you're a club guy and you don't even know what tire pressures to run, then something like that's probably okay for you as long as structurally it's sound. What else is there? That might be about it for now. I mean, we're going on 13 minutes, so I don't want to go too long. But those are just some of the things I look for when somebody has a front end impact. Again, spindles, spindle arms, heim joints, tie rods, steering shaft. Same thing on that side. The heel stops need to be readjusted. Oh, pedals. I have seen where guys have hit so hard, they've actually bent the pedals forward. So you do want to inspect that, especially your brake pedal, because, again, braking and steering on a go-kart from a safety standpoint is extremely important. So just don't even compromise with steering or brakes. So you're going to be looking for any bending on the Freeline or the Burrells. These are aluminum. Aluminum doesn't like to be bent a lot. So you're looking for any discoloration in the anodizing, making sure they're not bent forward. Because again, big impact. Your feet go forward, your body weight goes into the pedal, and starts bending stuff. Actually, now that I'm looking at this, bear with me for 1 second while I show you a brake rod thing. Did you guys see my trike, the electric trike I was working on the other day? So that's the original flywheel. That was the old clutch that wasn't working. So that was the trike. You can go on my other accounts, other social accounts, and check that out. I probably have it on YouTube as well. So what we're doing here. Okay. Brake. full forward. Okay, you got the brake. And all right, so the rear brakes are locking up. What is grabbing my attention? I don't know if you're going to see it at this angle or not. Let's see here. Bear with me, bear with me. Right there. Okay. You see, watch right here on the cable. This is a safety cable. You see how it's getting tighter and tighter? So you're going to apply full force to the brakes. If this is tight, there is a good chance this cable is not adjusted properly. This is an emergency cable. In case the rod comes off or breaks or something else has a failure, this is a safety cable. When you're at full brake capacity, this should still be a little loose. Because if this is tight as you're giving it brake, you're applying the brake. If this gets tighter, 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 I've actually done this myself, where this will lock up your brake system. You'll end up in a bind. So, you didn't see my fingers there. But you'll have an X, basically. You have an X, and it starts binding up, and the brake rod and the brake cable start fighting each other, and you feel like you're actually having full brake, but it's actually the bind between the cable and the rod. So, this looks like it's going to be a very simple fix by removing the tape, and it just seems like it's taped too hard, but it's a little loose. But to me, as the pads wear, I don't know, I'm not comfortable with that, so I'm going to loosen up this brake safety cable so that way it's not binding up with the rod and giving you a false sense of full brake. So I hope you found that helpful. In the comments, leave a comment on the next what to look for on the go-kart. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Have a great weekend, everybody.